The morning briefing room at Edwards Air Force Base fell silent when Lieutenant Colonel Katerina Ghost Voss walked through the door. Not the respectful silence reserved for superior officers, but the uncomfortable quiet that follows an unwelcome interruption. General Morrison's weathered face flickered with barely concealed irritation as he glanced at his watch. The assembled pilots, 12 of the Air Force's finest, shifted in their seats like restless predators suddenly aware of an intruder in their territory. "You're late, Voss." Morrison's voice carried the weight of decades spent breaking subordinates who dared challenge military precision. Katerina's steel-gray eyes met his without flinching. "Traffic control held me up for 20 minutes, sir. Apparently, my clearance codes needed verification." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, the implication clear to everyone present. Morrison's jaw tightened. The verification delay was no accident. It was bureaucratic warfare, the kind of petty sabotage that had followed Katerina throughout her 15-year career. Despite her flawless record, despite the 3 confirmed kills over Syria, despite being one of only 7 pilots certified on both F-22 and F-35 platforms, she remained an outsider in a brotherhood that measured worth by chromosomes rather than capability. "We were just discussing Operation Ghostwalk," Morrison continued, his tone suggesting she had missed nothing of importance. "Intelligence indicates a high-value target moving through the Kandahar corridor. Unknown aircraft, possibly stealth-capable, operating without transponder identification." The mission details were sparse, deliberately so. Satellite imagery showed heat signatures that appeared and vanished like mirages. Radar stations reported contacts that shouldn't exist, moving at impossible speeds through restricted airspace. 3 reconnaissance drones had gone silent in the past 72 hours, their final transmissions cut mid-sentence as if swallowed by the desert itself. "Any pilot will do for this one," Morrison announced, his casual dismissal designed to sting. "Simple intercept and identify mission." But when Katerina's F-22 Raptor broke formation first during the scramble, rolling, inverted, and diving toward the target coordinates, while the other pilots were still processing Morrison's orders, something shifted in the general's expression. His confident smirk faltered as he watched her aircraft disappear into the Afghan sky with predatory grace. 20 minutes later, when Katerina's voice crackled through the radio with coordinates that would change everything, Morrison realized his mistake. This wasn't just any pilot. This was Ghost, the phantom who had earned her call sign by vanishing from enemy radar like smoke, only to reappear behind their targets with deadly precision. The unknown contact she was pursuing would test every skill she had learned in the unforgiving skis above 3 different war zones. But more importantly, it would force a room full of doubters to confront an uncomfortable truth about the warrior they had spent years underestimating. The Raptor's engine screamed through thin mountain air as Katerina pushed the twin Pratt and Whitney turbofans beyond their recommended operational limits. Her heads-up display painted the Afghan landscape in eerie green phosphorescence, transforming jagged peaks into alien geometries that seemed to shift and breathe in her peripheral vision. The unknown contact, designated Bandit 1, had vanished from conventional radar, but her aircraft's experimental sensors were picking up thermal anomalies that defied explanation. "Ghost, this is Control. We've lost you on primary radar. Confirm your position." Morrison's voice crackled through her headset, tension bleeding through the static. "Grid coordinates 279er by 448, altitude Angels 25 and climbing," Katerina responded, her voice steady despite the 4G forces pressing her into her ejection seat. "Bandit 1 is playing games with us, Control. Heat signature suggests afterburner use, but acoustic sensors aren't picking up engine noise." Through her canopy, the Hindu Kush mountains stretched endlessly toward Pakistan, their snow-capped peaks catching the first rays of dawn like broken glass. It was beautiful and deadly, the kind of terrain that had swallowed aircraft whole and left no trace for search and rescue teams to follow. Katerina had seen it before, during her deployment with the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing. She knew these mountains held secrets that made even experienced pilots whisper prayers to gods they'd forgotten since childhood. The targeting computer chimed softly as it acquired a lock. Katerina's breath caught in her throat. The contact was there, a dark silhouette banking sharply around a granite spire, moving with fluid grace that seemed to mock the laws of physics. But something was wrong with the visual. The aircraft's profile didn't match anything in her extensive recognition database. Control, I have visual contact. Unknown aircraft, approximately 30 nautical miles southeast of Bagram Airfield. Configuration, unusual. She paused, studying the bizarre sight through her helmet-mounted display. The aircraft was roughly F-22 sized but with wing geometries that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Define unusual, Ghost. Morrison's voice carried new urgency. Sir, I'm looking at wing structures that appear to be morphing in real time. The aircraft's aspect ratio is changing as I watch. This isn't any known technology in our threat assessment files. Back at Edwards, the briefing room had erupted into controlled chaos. Intelligence officers huddled around computer terminals, cross-referencing Katerina's transmission with classified files that most of the assembled pilots lacked clearance to access. Morrison's earlier confidence had evaporated like desert rain, replaced by the grim realization that Operation Ghostwalk had just evolved from routine intercept mission to potential first contact with advanced foreign technology. Major Harrison, call sign Bulldog, leaned toward his wingman. Think the Ice Queen's finally lost it. Morphing wings sound like science fiction bullshit to me. But Colonel Martinez, the squadron's most senior pilot, silenced him with a sharp look. Martinez remembered Katerina's first deployment, when she'd saved his life by spotting SAM sites that every other pilot in the formation had missed. If Ghost said she was seeing impossible technology, then impossible technology was exactly what they were dealing with. The radio crackled again, Katerina's voice now carrying undertones of awe mixed with professional concern. Control, Bandit 1 is accelerating. Current speed. This can't be right. I'm reading Mach 4.2 and climbing. Katerina's Raptor shuddered as she pushed the aircraft through Mach 2.5, the airframe groaning under stresses that would have torn lesser fighters apart like paper dolls. Her flight suit's integrated cooling system worked overtime to combat the heat buildup, but sweat still beaded on her forehead despite the frigid air outside her canopy. The unknown aircraft, whatever it was, had opened the distance between them with casual ease, demonstrating performance capabilities that shouldn't exist. Ghost, you are approaching engine red line, her weapons systems officer's voice warned through the intercom. Lieutenant Sarah Park had been assigned to Katerina's aircraft only 3 days earlier, a last-minute replacement for her regular WSO who'd been grounded with a burst appendix. The young officer's nervousness was palpable, transmitted through every carefully modulated word. I'm aware of our limitations, Park, Katerina replied, her own voice betraying none of the concern that was building in her chest like ice water. But we need to maintain visual contact. That aircraft represents technology decades ahead of anything in our inventory. If we lose it now, we may never get another opportunity for assessment. The truth was more complex than her official reasoning suggested. Katerina had spent the last 5 years watching promising missions assigned to other pilots, relegated to training exercises and milk runs, while her male counterparts received the high-profile assignments that built careers and reputations. This contact, this impossible aircraft dancing through the Hindu Kush like a mountain spirit, represented something she couldn't define but desperately needed. Vindication, perhaps. Or simply the chance to prove that 15 years of systematic marginalization hadn't broken her spirit. Her radar warning receiver screamed suddenly, indicating that something was painting her aircraft with targeting radar. but the signal characteristics were unlike anything in her experience. The frequency modulation was too complex, the beam focus too precise. It felt like being examined under a microscope by an intelligence that operated on principles she couldn't comprehend. Control, Ghost is being illuminated by unknown radar. Signal characteristics don't match any known threat systems. Recommend immediate support package deployment. Morrison's response was immediate, negative on support package. Maintain contact and continue assessment. Do not, repeat, do not, take any aggressive action unless directly threatened. The transmission carried undertones that Katerina recognized from years of reading between the lines of military communications. Morrison was walking a political tightrope, balancing operational necessity against the knowledge that any escalation could trigger consequences far beyond his authority to manage. She was alone up here, 30,000 feet above some of the most hostile terrain on Earth, pursuing an aircraft that might represent foreign technology so advanced it could reshape global military balance. The Bandit 1 aircraft suddenly rolled inverted and began descending toward a narrow valley between two massive peaks. Katerina followed without hesitation, her Raptor's wings automatically adjusting configuration for the changing air density. The valley walls closed around them like the throat of some ancient god, and for a moment she felt the primal fear that had haunted aviators since the first human looked skyward and dreamed of flight. Then the unknown aircraft simply vanished, not gradually fading from sensors or disappearing behind terrain features. It was there one moment, solid and real, and gone the next as if it had never existed at all. The silence that followed the disappearance stretched like a held breath across two continents. In the briefing room at Edwards, 12 of America's most experienced pilots stared at displays that showed empty sky, where moments before their instruments had tracked an impossible encounter. Morrison's weathered hands gripped the edge of the situation table hard enough to whiten his knuckles, while intelligence officers scrambled through classification levels that most of them had never seen. "Ghost, confirm your last transmission." Morrison's voice carried the carefully controlled tone of a man trying to maintain operational composure, while his understanding of reality underwent fundamental revision. Katerina's response came through layers of static generated by the mountain peaks surrounding her position. "Control, I confirm disappearance of Bandit 1 at grid coordinates 287 by 452. One moment visual contact, next moment empty sky. No explosion, no debris cloud, no infrared signature fade. The aircraft simply ceased to exist." She banked her Raptor in a wide circle around the coordinates where the unknown aircraft had vanished, her sensors sweeping the valley floor for any trace of wreckage or thermal signature. The Hindu Kush peaks rose around her like cathedral spires, their snow-covered summits catching the early morning sun and throwing it back in crystalline fragments that made her squint despite her helmet's polarized visor. Park's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Ma'am, I'm reading atmospheric disturbances at the vanishing point. Electromagnetic fluctuations consistent with. I don't know what they're consistent with. This is outside my training parameters." Katerina felt a cold smile cross her lips. Outside training parameters, the military's polite way of acknowledging that they were operating in uncharted territory, where regulations and standard operating procedures offered no guidance. She'd spent her entire career in such territory, navigating the undefined spaces between what was officially possible and what actually happened when skilled pilots pushed their aircraft beyond the edges of manufacturer specifications. "Park, begin recording all sensor data for intelligence analysis. Full spectrum electromagnetic, acoustic, and infrared. If that aircraft used some form of advanced stealth technology, there might be residual signatures we can analyze." But even as she spoke, Katerina knew they were grasping at shadows. The disappearance had been too complete, too absolute. No human technology could simply cease to exist like that, which left implications that neither she nor her superiors were prepared to confront. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Ghost, return to base immediately. This mission is now classified beyond your clearance level." The dismissal stung like a physical blow. Katerina had been the only pilot to maintain visual contact with the unknown aircraft, the only witness to its impossible capabilities and subsequent vanishing. Now, just as the encounter reached its crucial phase, she was being removed from the equation by the same institutional forces that had marginalized her throughout her career. Understood, Control. Ghost returning to base. But as she turned her Raptor toward Edwards Air Force Base, Katerina's gray eyes held a determination that would have worried Morrison if he could have seen it. She had encountered something that challenged every assumption about the possible, and no amount of classification or bureaucratic maneuvering would erase what she had witnessed in the thin air above Afghanistan. The flight home would give her time to think, to plan, and to prepare for the interrogation that awaited her. The debrief facility at Edwards resembled a medical examination room more than a military conference space. Sterile white walls, fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across stainless steel furniture, and the omnipresent sense of being observed. Katerina sat alone at a metal table, her flight suit still damp with perspiration from the mission, while hidden cameras recorded her every gesture for analysis by intelligence specialists whose names she would never learn. General Morrison entered first, followed by two civilians in dark suits whose IDs identified them as Department of Defense contractors. Behind them came Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a psychiatric evaluation specialist whose presence sent a clear message about the direction this interrogation would take. They were questioning her sanity before examining her evidence. "Lieutenant Colonel Voss," Morrison began, settling into the chair across from her with the deliberate movements of a man carrying unwelcome news. "Your mission report contains several anomalies that require clarification." Katerina met his gaze without flinching. "I'm prepared to answer any questions about my observations, sir." One of the civilians, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and the pallor of someone who spent too much time in windowless rooms, opened a tablet and began reading. "You claim to have pursued an aircraft demonstrating flight characteristics beyond known technology, morphing wing structures, impossible acceleration curves, and complete disappearance without trace. These observations contradict the laws of physics as currently understood." "I reported what I saw," Katerina replied evenly. "My aircraft's sensor data should corroborate the encounter." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice carrying the practiced empathy of someone trained to extract admissions from reluctant subjects. "Lieutenant Colonel, you've been under considerable stress lately. 3 deployments in 5 years, minimal leave time, persistent interpersonal friction with fellow officers. It's possible that fatigue and psychological pressure could have influenced your perceptions." The suggestion hung in the air like cordite smoke. They were offering her an escape route. Admit to hallucination brought on by stress, accept medical leave and career rehabilitation, and the impossible encounter could be filed away as pilot error rather than potential threat to national security. Katerina's response was arctic in its precision. "Doctor, I've flown combat missions over 3 separate theaters of operation. I've been shot at by surface-to-air missiles, pursued by enemy fighters, and forced to navigate through sandstorms that turned day into night. If stress-induced hallucinations were going to affect my performance, they would have surfaced years ago." Morrison's expression darkened. "The alternative explanation is that you encountered technology decades ahead of anything in our intelligence files. Foreign stealth aircraft capable of performance characteristics that our best engineers consider impossible. That possibility carries implications for national security that frankly terrify everyone in this room." The second civilian, a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, spoke for the first time. "Lieutenant Colonel, are you absolutely certain about what you observed? Any doubt Any possibility of misinterpretation could be crucial for our assessment. Katerina understood the subtext. They wanted her to recant, to provide them with plausible deniability that would allow the incident to disappear into classified archives. Her testimony was inconvenient truth that challenged too many assumptions about American technological superiority. "I am certain of my observations," she replied, "and I believe Lieutenant Park's sensor data will support my account." The silence that followed carried weight like a gathering storm. Outside the facility, the California desert stretched endlessly toward distant mountains, but inside this sterile room, the boundaries of possibility were being redrawn. Lieutenant Sarah Park sat in an identical room 3 corridors away, her young face pale under the harsh fluorescent lighting. The same panel of interrogators faced her across the same sterile metal table, but their approach with the weapons systems officer was markedly different. Where they had confronted Katerina with barely concealed skepticism, they offered Park sympathy and understanding. "This was your first mission with Lieutenant Colonel Voss," Dr. Chen observed, consulting her tablet with practiced casualness. "You'd heard the stories about her, of course, the reputation for unconventional behavior." Park's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass placed strategically within reach. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you mean by unconventional behavior." The gray-haired civilian smiled with paternal warmth. "Come now, Lieutenant. Every pilot at Edwards knows about Ghost Voss and her tendency toward dramatic interpretations of routine encounters. The incident over Syria where she claimed to engage invisible fighters. The training exercise where she reported aircraft that other pilots couldn't see. We're not suggesting deliberate deception, just a pattern of enhanced perception that sometimes exceeds observable reality." It was masterfully done. They were rewriting Katerina's combat record, transforming legitimate encounters with advanced enemy technology into a history of delusion and attention-seeking behavior. Park, young and uncertain, was being offered the chance to distance herself from a superior officer whose career was being systematically dismantled. I'm not sure what I saw out there," Park admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The sensor readings were unlike anything in my training. Maybe the equipment malfunctioned. Maybe atmospheric conditions caused false signatures." Morrison leaned forward, his expression gentle but insistent. "Lieutenant, your career is just beginning. One unfortunate mission doesn't have to define your future. We understand that you were following orders, trusting in the judgment of a superior officer whose own judgment may have been compromised." Outside Park's interrogation room, Katerina's recorded sensor data was being analyzed by computer systems capable of detecting deception down to individual pixel manipulation. But the results were disturbing rather than reassuring. Every measurement, every electromagnetic signature, every thermal reading supported her impossible account. The data suggested encounters with technology that officially didn't exist, operated by intelligence that had no authorized presence in Afghan airspace. In a secure office 5 levels below the debrief facility, General Morrison stared at preliminary analysis reports that would never appear in official files. The implications were staggering. If Katerina's observations were accurate, American air superiority, the foundation of global military strategy for the past 70 years, had become an obsolete concept overnight. His secure phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for direct communication from the Pentagon. The voice on the other end carried authority that made Morrison's shoulders instinctively straighten despite the distance between them. "General, we need this situation contained immediately. Whatever Lieutenant Colonel Voss thinks she saw, it cannot become part of official record. Use whatever means necessary to ensure her silence." Morrison understood the subtext. Katerina's career was being sacrificed to preserve illusions of technological dominance that kept allied nations confident in American protection. One pilot's reputation was expendable currency in geopolitical calculations that spanned decades. But as he ended the call, Morrison found himself remembering the precise confidence in Katerina's voice as she described impossible aircraft performing impossible maneuvers. She had sounded like a pilot reporting observable truth, not a woman suffering from stress-induced hallucinations. The classified archive facility beneath Edwards Air Force Base hummed with the constant whisper of climate control systems, maintaining precise temperature and humidity levels required to preserve sensitive documents. Katerina moved through corridors lined with filing cabinets that contained the military's most closely guarded secrets, her temporary security clearance allowing access to historical incidents that officially never occurred. Her escort, a young Air Force sergeant named Martinez, glanced nervously at the files she was reviewing. "Ma'am, are you sure you have authorization for these particular documents?" Section 15. Be clearance for investigation of related aerial phenomena. Katerina replied without looking up from the manila folder in her hands. The authorization was legitimate, obtained through a combination of her security rating and Morrison's reluctant signature on a form he'd signed without reading carefully. The files told a disturbing story. Project Blue Book had officially ended in 1969, but military encounters with unexplained aerial phenomena had continued with clockwork regularity. Every few years, another pilot reported aircraft with impossible performance characteristics. Every few years, another career was quietly destroyed through suggestions of mental instability or equipment malfunction. Flight Lieutenant Rebecca Hawk Thompson, 1987, reported pursuing an aircraft capable of instantaneous 90-degree turns over Nevada test site, subsequently failed psychiatric evaluation and was medically discharged. Major David Eagle Rodriguez, 1994, described tracking unknown aircraft that appeared to teleport between geographical locations during mission over restricted airspace near Area 51. Died in a training accident 3 weeks after his debrief. Captain Jennifer Phoenix Walker, 2003, visual contact with aircraft demonstrating propulsion systems producing no visible exhaust signature over Iraq, transferred to administrative duties and retired early due to stress-related performance issues. The pattern was unmistakable. Competent pilots with exemplary records encountered impossible technology, reported their observations through proper channels, then found their careers systematically dismantled by institutional forces that preferred convenient lies to inconvenient truth. Katerina's fingers traced the photographs attached to each file, young faces full of confidence and professional pride, transformed by official skepticism into cautionary tales about the dangers of challenging accepted reality. She recognized something of herself in their expressions, the same determination to serve their country regardless of personal cost. Sergeant Martinez shifted uncomfortably as she photographed key documents with a miniature camera disguised as a pen. "Ma'am, I'm not sure about." "About what, Sergeant?" Katerina's voice carried the edge of authority earned through 15 years of military service. "About following proper procedure for classified investigation, about ensuring that critical intelligence reaches appropriate analysis channels." But they both knew the real question hanging between them. Would she become another cautionary tale, another promising officer whose encounter with impossible truth led to professional destruction? Or would she find a way to break the cycle of institutional denial that had protected these secrets for decades? The final file in her stack contained a single photograph and a handwritten note. Unknown aircraft, multiple witnesses, complete sensor failure during encounter. Investigation terminated by direct order from Pentagon liaison. All personnel involved transferred to non-combat assignments. The photograph showed a craft identical to the one she had pursued over Afghanistan. The officers' club at Edwards buzzed with the familiar rhythm of military social interaction, subdued conversations punctuated by occasional laughter, the clink of glasses against polished wood, and the underlying tension that pervaded any gathering of professional warriors during uncertain times. Katerina sat alone at the bar, nursing a single malt scotch that she had no intention of finishing, her presence creating a zone of uncomfortable silence among pilots who had once considered her a peer. Major Harrison approached with the exaggerated confidence of someone who had consumed several drinks beyond his usual limit. "Well, if it isn't our resident UFO hunter," he announced loudly enough to ensure every conversation in the vicinity would pause. "Tell us, Ghost, did the little green men have anything interesting to say?" The nickname that had once carried respect, earned through her ability to appear and disappear from enemy radar like a phantom, now dripped with mockery. Katerina met his bloodshot gaze without flinching, her own expression neutral as winter sky. "I reported what I observed, Harrison. Nothing more, nothing less." Colonel Martinez, her former squadron leader, slid onto the adjacent barstool with movements that spoke of old injuries and older regrets. Unlike the others, his eyes held sympathy rather than derision. "Kate, you know I've got your back, always have, but this situation, it's bigger than you realize." "Enlighten me." Martinez glanced around the room, ensuring their conversation remained private despite the attention focused on their table. "There are forces in this organization that view your report as a threat to operational security, not because they think you're lying, but because they're terrified you might be telling the truth." The admission hung between them like smoke from a discharged weapon. Katerina understood the implications immediately. If her observations were accurate, American air superiority existed only as long as the unknown aircraft's operators chose to remain hidden. The military-industrial complex that had shaped global politics for 70 years was built on technological assumptions that might be completely obsolete. "They offered me early retirement," she said quietly. "Full pension, medical benefits, no questions asked. All I have to do is sign a statement acknowledging that stress and fatigue influenced my perceptions during the mission." "That's generous," Martinez replied, but his tone suggested he understood the true cost of such generosity, more generous than what happened to the others. Harrison's voice carried across the room again. "Hey, Ghost, maybe you should write a book. My Adventures in Fantasy Land by Lieutenant Colonel Crazy Person." The laughter that followed was harsh and uncomfortable, the kind of desperate humor that military personnel use to process situations beyond their comprehension. But beneath the mockery, Katerina detected something else: fear. These pilots, America's finest, were confronting the possibility that everything they understood about aerial combat had become irrelevant overnight. She finished her scotch and placed the glass precisely in the center of its coaster. "Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "If you encountered technology that challenged every assumption about what's possible, would you report it, even knowing what happened to me?" The silence stretched long enough for both of them to hear the desert wind rattling the windows. Finally, Martinez spoke. "I'd like to think I would, but after watching what they're doing to you," he shook his head. "I don't know, Kate, I honestly don't know." As Katerina left the officers' club, she understood that her isolation was complete. The institution she had served faithfully for 15 years had branded her as unreliable, dangerous to operational security, and expendable. But walking across the base under a canopy of stars that had witnessed impossible things, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: absolute clarity about what needed to be done. The secure hangar at the edge of Edwards Air Force Base stood empty, except for maintenance equipment and the lingering smell of hydraulic fluid. Katerina moved through the shadows with practiced stealth, her footsteps silent on concrete floors that had supported some of the most advanced aircraft ever built. The building's isolation made it perfect for clandestine meetings. far enough from the main base to avoid casual observation, but still within the secured perimeter that kept civilian witnesses at bay. Dr. Sarah Kim emerged from behind a partially dismantled F-35 engine, her civilian clothes incongruous among the military hardware. The aerospace engineer's presence at Edwards was officially related to propulsion system upgrades, but her real credentials included advanced degrees in theoretical physics and a security clearance that exceeded most general officers. "You took a significant risk contacting me," Kim said without preamble. "My research into exotic propulsion systems is already viewed with suspicion by certain elements within the defense establishment." Katerina handed her the photographs copied from the classified archives. "Doctor, I need to know if what I observed is theoretically possible using technology that might exist today." Kim studied the images under a small LED light, her expression growing more troubled with each photograph. "These craft configurations, they're remarkably similar to theoretical designs my team developed for the Aurora project. Morphing wing structures, electromagnetic field manipulation for stealth and propulsion. But we're talking about technology that won't be feasible for another 20 or 30 years. Unless someone else solved the engineering problems first." "Exactly." Kim lowered the photographs and met Katerina's gaze. "There are rumors in the theoretical physics community about breakthrough research being conducted outside official channels. Private aerospace companies with unlimited funding and no oversight. Theoretical work on manipulation of electromagnetic fields that could produce the flight characteristics you described." The implications were staggering. If private corporations or foreign governments had achieved technological breakthroughs decades ahead of official American research, the global balance of power was already shifting in ways that military leadership couldn't comprehend. "Doctor, is there any way to prove what I observed without relying on testimony that's being systematically discredited?" Kim was quiet for several minutes, her fingers drumming against her leg as she processed possibilities. "There might be. If these aircraft use exotic propulsion systems, they would generate electromagnetic signatures unlike anything produced by conventional technology. The problem is that detecting such signatures requires sensor arrays specifically designed for that purpose. And those sensors don't exist in standard military inventory." "No, but they exist in my laboratory. Experimental equipment designed to test theoretical propulsion concepts." Kim's eyes brightened with the enthusiasm of a scientist presented with an irresistible puzzle. "If you could arrange another encounter with these aircraft, I could deploy portable sensor arrays capable of recording proof that would be impossible to discredit." Katerina felt something cold settle in her stomach. Kim was suggesting deliberately seeking another encounter with technology that had effortlessly outperformed the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. It would mean violating direct orders, risking not just her career, but potentially her life. "Doctor, what you're proposing is essentially a solo reconnaissance mission into airspace, where I've already encountered unknown hostiles. My superiors have made it clear that any further investigation will result in immediate court-martial." "I understand the risks," Kim replied. "But consider the alternative. If this technology exists and remains unacknowledged, how many more pilots will encounter it? How many careers will be destroyed to maintain institutional denial?" Outside the hangar, the night sky stretched endlessly above the Mojave Desert, filled with stars and possibilities that challenged human understanding of what was achievable. The mission planning took place in Kim's laboratory, a converted warehouse 30 miles from Edwards that officially existed as a private research facility, investigating advanced aerospace concepts. Unofficial funding came from sources that Kim preferred not to identify, allowing her to pursue theoretical work that traditional military budgets couldn't support. Banks of experimental equipment lined the walls: electromagnetic field generators, quantum resonance detectors, and sensor arrays that looked more like modern art installations than scientific instruments. Katerina studied the portable monitoring devices that Kim had designed to detect exotic propulsion signatures, trying to understand technology that operated on principles barely within human comprehension. The key is electromagnetic field manipulation, Kim explained, adjusting calibration settings on a device roughly the size of a briefcase. If these aircraft use controlled magnetic fields for both stealth and propulsion, they'll generate specific resonance patterns that conventional sensors can't detect. These instruments are designed to identify those patterns and record them with sufficient precision to constitute proof. Katerina nodded, but her attention was focused on the tactical challenges of Kim's proposal. Returning to Afghan airspace without authorization would require careful planning and considerable luck. Her F-22 would need to launch during a routine training exercise, deviate from planned flight path without triggering immediate recall, and somehow locate aircraft that appeared and disappeared according to their own mysterious schedule. Doctor, there's something you need to understand about military flying. We don't just launch aircraft and hope to encounter specific targets. Even if I could reach the coordinates where the previous contact occurred, there's no guarantee the unknown aircraft will appear again. Kim's response was immediate. They'll appear. My analysis of your sensor data suggests they were actively observing your aircraft, studying its capabilities. If you return to the same area, they'll likely attempt another encounter. The confidence in her voice was unsettling. Kim spoke like someone who understood the motivations of intelligence that might not be entirely human. You're suggesting they wanted to be observed. I'm suggesting they wanted to observe you. The previous encounter wasn't accidental. It was a test of American response capabilities. They allowed you to maintain visual contact just long enough to assess how your aircraft performed under stress. Katerina felt ice water in her veins. If Kim's assessment was accurate, her pursuit of the unknown aircraft had been a carefully orchestrated evaluation, with her F-22 serving as an unwitting test subject for technology that could reshape global military balance. Her secure satellite phone buzzed with an incoming text message. Mandatory psych evaluation scheduled 800 tomorrow. Failure to appear will result in immediate suspension of flight status. Morrison. The timing wasn't coincidental. Her superiors were accelerating the timeline for her removal from active duty, probably alerted by her inquiries into classified archives. Within 24 hours, she would be declared mentally unfit for flight operations and grounded pending further evaluation. Kim read the message over her shoulder. It appears your window of opportunity is narrowing rapidly. Doctor, if I do this, if I violate direct orders and attempt another encounter, there's no coming back from it. My career will be over regardless of what we discover. Lieutenant Colonel, your career is already over. The only question is whether your sacrifice will produce evidence that could prevent similar encounters from being covered up in the future. Through the laboratory's windows, dawn was breaking over the Mojave Desert, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Katerina of countless sunrises viewed from aircraft cockpits. Each dawn had brought new possibilities, new challenges to overcome through skill and determination. Tomorrow's dawn might be her last as a military pilot. The pre-flight briefing for training exercise 7 Alpha proceeded with mechanical precision that Katerina found oddly comforting. Squadron Leader Thompson outlined flight paths and communication protocols, while 12 pilots absorbed information they had processed hundreds of times before. The routine nature of the exercise provided perfect cover for what she was planning, a deviation from authorized flight path that would take her back to Afghan airspace, and the coordinates where impossible aircraft had disappeared like smoke. Major Harrison sat 2 rows behind her, his presence a constant reminder of the skepticism and derision that had followed her report. But there were others in the briefing room, whose expressions suggested growing doubt about the official narrative. Word traveled quickly in military communities, and whispered conversations in mess halls and ready rooms had begun questioning why a pilot with Katerina's record was being subjected to psychological evaluation after filing a routine contact report. Weather conditions over the exercise area are optimal, Thompson continued, consulting his tablet with professional efficiency. Visibility unlimited, winds light and variable. All aircraft will maintain radio contact throughout the exercise. Katerina understood the subtext. The communication requirement would make her unauthorized deviation immediately obvious, triggering recall orders that she would be required to acknowledge and follow. Once she broke from the formation and headed for Afghanistan, she would have perhaps 30 minutes before her actions resulted in official intervention. 30 minutes to locate unknown aircraft, deploy Kim's experimental sensors, and record evidence that could vindicate her observations or confirm her mental instability. Lieutenant Park approached as the briefing concluded, her young face troubled by conflicts between loyalty and self-preservation. "Ma'am, I've been assigned to a different aircraft for today's exercise. Administrative decision." The message was clear. Park was being distanced from association with Katerina's increasingly controversial status, protected from whatever consequences might follow her superior officer's actions. It was both professionally sensible and personally devastating, confirmation that even her weapons systems officer had been turned against her by institutional pressure. "I understand, Lieutenant. Follow your orders and protect your career." "Ma'am, I want you to know that what I saw out there, it wasn't normal. The sensor readings, the electromagnetic signatures. Maybe I don't understand what it all means, but I know it wasn't equipment malfunction." The admission was quietly brave, a junior officer's attempt to provide support without jeopardizing her own future. Katerina felt unexpected warmth toward the young woman who had chosen to speak truth despite official pressure to remain silent. In the equipment bay, Katerina secured Kim's experimental sensor package in her aircraft's external storage compartment, disguising the equipment among standard electronic warfare devices that were